So the Empire lost. That's where we're starting tonight, with the part everyone already knows. The second Death Star came apart in the sky over the forest moon of Endor. The fireworks went up on 1,000 worlds at once, and for one night, the whole galaxy sort of breathed out together. Palpatine was dead. Vader was gone. The Ewoks were banging on drums made out of stormtrooper helmets, which is a bit grim when you actually think about it. But nobody was thinking about it. They'd won. And that's usually where the story stops, isn't it? The music swells, everyone hugs, roll the credits. But I've always found the interesting bit is what happens the next morning. Because winning a battle and running a galaxy turn out to be two completely different jobs. And the people who were brilliant at the first one were about to find out. They were, at best, average at the second. Tonight we're going to wander through the whole thing. The New Republic. The government that grew out of that party over Endor, from the very first shaky declaration right through to the strange, sad war that ended it about 24 years later. Although ended isn't quite the right word, and we'll get to why. I should say up front, this is the old expanded universe version of events, the Legends timeline. If you've seen my Old Republic video, it's the same continuity, the same shelf of dusty novels and comics, so a few old faces are going to turn up again later on. There's a whole other version of the New Republic that came along afterward, but that's a story for a different night. Here's the shape of it, roughly. There's a long grind against an empire that flatly refused to accept it had lost. There's a blue-skinned admiral who nearly won the whole thing back with about a quarter of the ships. There's an emperor who died at Endor, and then, rather rudely, kept turning up anyway. There are super weapons, and there are a lot of them, honestly more than felt strictly necessary. And then, right at the very end, something turns up from outside the galaxy entirely, and everything changes. But none of that's happening yet. Right now it's just the morning after. A very tired group of rebels sitting in a room, realizing they've got a galaxy to build, and no real idea how to do it. If you fancy coming along for these, do subscribe. There's no rush at all. Get comfortable. Let's go back to that morning. Right, so the morning after, the Rebel Alliance had spent years being very good at one specific thing, which was hitting the Empire and then running away before anyone could hit them back. That's a fine skill. It is not, however, the same skill as sitting down and deciding who's in charge of, say, the water supply on 400,000 planets. And they knew it. You can feel it in the records from this period. This slightly panicked energy of people who finally caught the thing they were chasing and now have to work out what on earth to do with it. The first move was cautious. They pulled the various rebel factions together into something called the Alliance of Free Planets, which is a lovely name and tells you exactly how nervous everyone was about the word government. Nobody wanted to look like they were just building a smaller empire. That fear, by the way, is going to follow these people around for the next 2 decades. Keep it in the back of your mind. Then, about a month after Endor, they made it official. The Declaration of a New Republic. 8 people signed it, and I always think it's worth naming them, because they mattered. Mon Mothma of Chandrila, who'd basically been the political spine of the rebellion the whole way through. Princess Leia Organa, whose home planet of Alderaan wasn't even there anymore. Admiral Akbar of Dak, the Mon Calamari, the fish-headed fellow who plans every battle like it might be his last. Borsk Failure of Bothan, and do remember that name, because he's going to be a headache for years. And then Sian Tev of Sullust, Domin Barris, Kerithrar of Kashyyyk, and a chap with the magnificent name Verinifra Buthog Indriumseg, who I mostly mention because I enjoy saying it out loud. Mon Mothma became the first chief of state, and one of the very first big decisions she and the others made tells you everything about how spooked they were by the empire they'd just beaten. They decided the capital wouldn't simply sit on one world forever. The Senate would move around from world to world so that no single planet could ever become the beating heart of a galactic power the way Coruscant always had. It's a nice idea. It's also, if I'm honest, a slightly impractical one, and they quietly walk it back later. But you can't fault the intention. Now here's the problem they were all politely pretending not to have. The Empire hadn't actually gone anywhere. Yes, the Emperor was dead, and yes, the second Death Star was scrap, but the Imperial military was still absolutely enormous. We're talking the majority of the galaxy still under Imperial control the morning after Endor. What had really happened was that the head had been cut off, and the body was now thrashing about in a few hundred directions at once. Moffs and admirals and ambitious nobodies all grabbing whatever fleets and worlds they could and declaring themselves the true heir. So the war didn't end. It just got messier and more spread out, which is arguably worse. But before all that properly kicked off, there was this one lovely little oddity right at the very start, and it's one of my favourite footnotes in the whole era, the Bakura incident. Just days after Endor, out on a quiet frontier world called Bakura, the local Imperial garrison suddenly found itself under attack by something nobody had ever seen before. A reptilian species called the Sea Rook from beyond the edge of the galaxy, and their whole thing, the way their technology worked, ran on a genuinely horrible principle. They powered their machines by draining the life energy out of living people. They called it entekment, which is a very tidy little word for something that grim. So you've got this situation where the Imperial garrison is completely outmatched, and the only help within reach is a rebel task force that, up until about a week ago, was the enemy, and they have to work together, Imperials and rebels side by side, fighting off the soul-harvesting space lizards. It's the New Republic's very first foreign crisis, and it's absolutely bonkers, and I love that this is how the era opens. Not with grand politics, but with a haunted frontier planet and a truce that nobody wanted. There was another one around then as well, the Nagai Toth War, which was another pair of species turning up looking for a fight. But honestly, that's a bit of a footnote to the footnote. The point is really that the galaxy was full of things that had been kept in check by the Empire, and the moment the Empire started falling apart, all of them started poking their heads up at once. The New Republic spent its infancy discovering just how big and strange and full of problems the galaxy actually was. And through all of it, this tiny provisional government is sitting there, trying its best to look legitimate. That's the thing they craved more than anything in these early years. Legitimacy. They desperately wanted the galaxy to see them not as a scrappy band of insurgents who got lucky, but as the real, rightful successor to the old Republic. A proper government. The one everyone ought to rally behind. Which is exactly why, almost from day one, they became a little bit obsessed with a single planet, Coruscant. The city that covered an entire world, the seat of galactic government going back tens of thousands of years, all the way to the old Republic. Taking Coruscant wouldn't win the war on its own. Strategically, it was almost more trouble than it was worth. But as a symbol, it was everything. Whoever held Coruscant got to look like the real deal. The trouble was, Coruscant was still very much in Imperial hands, and getting to it meant going through the mess. All those warlords, all those splinter fleets, all that thrashing. So that's where the New Republic actually spent its first few years. Not making grand speeches, but slogging through a long and glamorous, deeply complicated cleanup of a broken empire. And that slog is where we're headed next. Let me set the scene on Coruscant because we're going to be coming back to it a lot tonight, and it's worth sitting with for a second. It's a planet, but you can't really see the planet. The whole surface, pole to pole, is city. Buildings stacked on buildings stacked on buildings, thousands of levels deep, so that people living down at the bottom have never once seen natural sunlight. From orbit at night, it just glows. One enormous circuit board of a world. That's the prize everyone was fighting over. And honestly, once you know what running the place actually involves, you start to think the winner rather drew the short straw. But we're not there yet, because getting to Coruscant meant getting through the warlords first. And the warlords were a proper piece of work. Now, the tricky thing about this stretch of the timeline is that it isn't one clean war. It's a few dozen smaller ones happening at once, and I'm not going to march you through every skirmish because you'd be asleep before we finished. Which, fair enough, is the goal, but not like that. So let me just give you the flavour of it through a couple of the characters who stood out. First one you should know about is Isan Izard. Wonderful villain, this one. She ran Imperial intelligence, and she had these strange mismatched eyes, one red, one blue, which earned her the nickname Iceheart, and Iceheart was clever in a properly nasty way. When the New Republic finally took Coruscant off her, she didn't just fight for it. She poisoned the well on her way out. She released a bioweapon called the Krytos virus, which was engineered, and this is the diabolical part, to only really harm non-human species. The idea being that the New Republic, which prided itself on being for everyone, would bankrupt itself trying to buy enough Bacta, the healing fluid, to save all its alien citizens, and it would sow resentment between humans and non-humans while it was at it. She basically tried to turn the New Republic's own decency into a weapon against it. That leads into this whole scramble called the Bacta War, where control of the galaxy's Bacta supply becomes the thing everyone's suddenly fighting over. Which sounds dull when I say it like that, but think about it. Somebody worked out that you don't need a Death Star, you just need to own all the medicine. Grim and clever and a bit ahead of its time. The other big name of the period is Warlord Ginge, who carved out his own little private empire and just sat in it being a nuisance for years. He's the sort of enemy who doesn't want to conquer the galaxy so much as he wants to keep his corner of it and be left alone to be awful in peace. The New Republic threw a lot of resources at Ginge, and it took ages, and it's the kind of long, grinding subplot that doesn't make it into the highlight reels, but ate up a huge chunk of everyone's attention at the time. And then, somewhere in the middle of all this, they take Coruscant. Around 6.5, 7 years after that first battle over Endor. It wasn't clean, it wasn't easy, and it came with the poisoned parting gift from Iceheart that we just talked about, but they took it, and with it, they finally got the thing they'd been chasing since the beginning. That legitimacy. The Senate could sit on Coruscant in the actual halls of galactic government, and the message to the rest of the galaxy was clear. We are the Republic now, not a rebellion, the real thing. Here's a fun detail I always come back to about this era though. The people doing the actual work of it, the ones on the front line making all this happen, were mostly pilots. And the pilots I want to give a moment to are Rogue Squadron. If you've spent any time in this corner of Star Wars, you'll know them. And if you haven't, they're basically the best starfighter squadron in the galaxy, led for a good while by a chap called Wedge Antilles. And I've got a soft spot for Wedge, because Wedge is not a Skywalker. He's not a chosen one. He can't use the Force, he's not the son of anyone important. He's just a genuinely brilliant pilot who keeps showing up, does the job, and survives. He flew in both Death Star runs, mind you, both of them. He's one of about a handful of people who can say that. And he never gets the statue. He's the working man of this whole saga and this period, all the messy cleanup, the taking of worlds one boring system at a time. That's Wedge, and people like him doing the unglamorous graft while the politicians on Coruscant argue about committee structures, which they were absolutely doing, by the way, even this early. Because the second the fighting in any given region calmed down, the arguing started. Should power sit with the Senate or the Chief of State? How much of a military should a peace-loving republic even have? Every one of these questions is completely reasonable, and every one of them is also the sort of thing a room full of proud, principled people can argue about until the stars go out. You can already see, this early, the shape of the problem that's going to define the whole new republic. They were so terrified of becoming the Empire that they sometimes struggled to become anything at all. But for now, that was a problem for another day. By around 7 years in, the new republic controlled a huge slice of the galaxy. Something like 3/4 of the known worlds had come over to their side, including nearly all the core worlds, the rich, old, important ones near the centre. The Empire had been shoved out to the edges and broken into pieces. It really did look for a moment there like the war was basically over and the mopping up was just a formality, which is, of course, precisely the moment in any story like this when someone new walks in from the shadows and reminds everyone that it very much is not over. And the someone in this case had blue skin, red eyes, and a plan that was already several steps ahead of everyone in the room. But we'll get to him. Let's slow down first. So let's talk about Thrawn, because if you ask a room full of old expanded universe fans what their favourite bit of this whole era is, most of them are going to say the Thrawn trilogy. And they're not wrong too. His full name is a bit of a mouthful, Mitth'raw'nuruodo, so nearly everyone just calls him Thrawn. He's a chiss, which is a species from the unknown regions out past the edge of the maps, and he's got this striking look, blue skin and glowing red eyes, and an absolutely glacial calm about him at all times. He's a Grand Admiral, one of only a handful the Empire ever had, and while everyone else was thrashing about after Endor, Thrawn had been away on a mapping mission in the unknown regions, and rather missed the whole collapse. He comes back to find the Empire in ruins, sighs presumably, and sets about putting it back together. Here's the thing that makes Thrawn Thrawn, and it's such a good idea that I'm slightly annoyed nobody thought of it sooner. He studies art. That's his method. Before he fights a species, he immerses himself in their sculpture, their paintings, their music, and from that he works out how they think, how they'll react under pressure, whether they're the sort of people who'll hold a line or break and run, and then he uses that to beat them. It sounds like nonsense when you first hear it, and then you sit with it for a minute and think, well, actually, a culture does put itself into the things it makes. There's something to it. Whether it'd work in real life, I have no idea, but as a character trait, it's brilliant, because it means Thrawn never loses his temper and never rushes. He just quietly understands you better than you understand yourself, and then he's 3 moves ahead. His right-hand man is Captain Pellaeon, who commands his flagship, the Chimera. And I want to flag Pellaeon early, because he's going to turn out to be one of the most important people in this entire story, in a way nobody watching at the time would have guessed. For now, he's just a steady, decent officer, standing slightly behind the genius, being the audience's way into all this. But keep an eye on him. Now, Thrawn's problem is simple. He hasn't got enough ships. The Empire's been shattered. He's working with a fraction of its old strength, and he can't outbuild the New Republic. So his whole campaign becomes this beautiful, intricate puzzle of getting more with less. And the pieces he goes looking for are wonderful. First, he finds one of the old Emperor's secret storehouses, hidden inside a mountain called Mount Tantis, on a backwater world called Wayland. And inside, among other treasures, are 2 things that change everything. One is a stash of Sparty cloning cylinders, which means Thrawn can grow himself an army fast. The other is a working cloaking device, which, in a galaxy where nobody else has proper cloaking tech, is a properly frightening thing to hand a tactical genius. Second, he goes and collects these strange little creatures called Ysalamiri from a world called Moirka, and the Ysalamiri have this bizarre and very specific ability. They push the Force away, they create a bubble around themselves where the Force simply doesn't work, which means a Jedi standing next to one is, for all practical purposes, just a person. You can see immediately why Thrawn wants a few of those in his back pocket. And third, guarding that mountain storehouse, he finds a Jedi. Sort of. A mad old Jedi master called Joruus C'baoth. And I say sort of, because C'baoth is actually a clone of a Jedi master who died years ago, grown too fast, which has left him powerful and completely round the bend. Thrawn strikes a deal with him. C'baoth will help coordinate Thrawn's fleets using the Force, letting them move with an almost supernatural unity, and in exchange, Thrawn promises to deliver him some apprentices. Specifically, Luke Skywalker and Leia's unborn twins. The two of them are absolutely planning to betray each other the whole time, obviously, but for now, it's a marriage of convenience. There's a lovely thread running through all this involving a woman called Mara Jade, who used to be the Emperor's hand, his personal secret agent, and who has spent years living with the fact that the Emperor's dying command, burned into her mind, was to kill Luke Skywalker. So she's got this compulsion she can't shake, and a lot of complicated feelings about it. She ends up working with a charming information broker called Talon Karrde, and the slow thaw between Mara and Luke over the course of these books is one of the best things in it. File that away too, it pays off years later. Thrawn's actual campaign is a series of clever raids and traps. He tries to steal the New Republic's fleet at the Sluis Van shipyards, using mining equipment to hijack the ships, rather than destroy them, which nearly works. He goes hunting for a lost fleet of old warships called the Katana Fleet, and in one of his cheekiest moves, he uses that cloaking device to hide a load of asteroids in orbit around Coruscant. He doesn't even need to have really done it. He just needs the New Republic to believe he might have, and suddenly they daren't lower their planetary shields for fear of an invisible rock coming down through the roof. He besieges the capital of the galaxy with a bluff. That's the kind of enemy he is. And meanwhile, back on Coruscant, the New Republic is doing what the New Republic does best, which is getting in its own way. Remember Borsk Failure, the Botan from the Founding? He spends this whole crisis trying to grab power for himself and his people, at one point going after poor Admiral Akbar with planted evidence of treason, all while the actual enemy is closing in. It's maddening to read, and it's also completely true to how these people operated. Thrawn understood that too, by the way. He counted on their politics tripping them up. He was usually right. How it ends is almost quiet considering. It comes down to a big battle at a place called Bilbringi. Akbar sets a trap, thinking he's about to hand the Empire its second Endor, but Thrawn, being Thrawn, has read the situation and laid a counter-trap, and the New Republic fleet gets badly mauled. Strategically, Thrawn wins that day, and then, right at his moment of advantage, one of his own bodyguards, a Nogri called Rook, quietly steps up behind him and kills him. Because Thrawn, for all his brilliance, had never quite understood the one species he'd been using as servants, and their loyalty had shifted to Leia without him noticing. His last words are something like, "But it was so artistically done," which is such a perfect way for that particular man to go out. And just like that, the most dangerous enemy the New Republic ever faced was simply gone. The campaign collapsed without him. The Empire fell back into infighting. Oh, and in the middle of all this, in the quieter human corners of the story, Han and Leia had their twins, Jacen and Jaina Solo, born right in the thick of the Thrawn crisis, into a galaxy that never really stopped being at war their whole lives. Remember them. They're going to end up mattering more than almost anyone. But that's for much later. For now, let's move on. Because the Empire had one more surprise left, and it was a big one. Now this next bit is where the story goes properly strange, and I have to be honest with you, it's one of the parts that longtime fans argue about the most. Because barely a year after Thrawn, the New Republic gets the news that no one wanted to hear. Palpatine is back. Which, hang on, Palpatine died at Endor. We watched Vader throw him down a reactor shaft. That was sort of the whole point. And yet, out in the deep core, that dense, dangerous cluster of stars, right at the heart of the galaxy, on a hidden world called Biss, there he is. Young again, very much alive, very much in charge. Here's the explanation, and you can take it or leave it. The Emperor, being who he was, had never really intended to let a little thing like death stop him. He'd secretly grown himself a whole store of clone bodies, and when he died at Endor, his spirit, his consciousness, whatever you want to call it, didn't move on. It travelled to Biss and dropped itself into one of those clones. So the thing sitting on the throne isn't quite the original man. It's more like Palpatine wearing a fresh copy of himself. And the clones keep degrading, burning out from the sheer force of the dark side, pouring through them, so he keeps having to hop into new ones. Which means if you think about it too hard, he's essentially killing himself, over and over, just to stay in the game. There's something almost pathetic in that. Under all the menace, this is a man so unwilling to let go that he's turned his own immortality into a slow, grinding treadmill of dying. And he hasn't come back empty-handed. This is where the super weapons really start piling up. And I did warn you, there were a lot of them. He's got these things called world devastators, which are enormous mobile factories that land on a planet and just eat it, feeding the raw materials straight into building more warships and more devastators as they go. So the weapon builds itself an army out of the world it's destroying. Nasty concept, that. And then there's the galaxy gun, which is exactly as subtle as it sounds. It's a massive weapon platform that fires a single projectile capable of travelling across the entire galaxy through hyperspace to destroy a target world. A Death Star at least had to show up. The galaxy gun could end your planet from the other side of everything, and you'd never even see what did it. The reborn Emperor was not a man who did things by halves. Now the part of this that really lands, and the reason it's worth telling despite all the clone weirdness, is what happens to Luke. Because Luke Skywalker makes a decision here that I still find genuinely uncomfortable, and I think it's meant to. He decides the only way to get close enough to Palpatine to destroy him is to pretend to join him, to turn to the dark side, to become the Emperor's apprentice, the way his father once was. And the awful thing is that it's not entirely pretend. He gets in there, and the dark side is exactly as seductive as everyone always warned. And for a while there, our hero is genuinely kneeling at the old monster's feet, wearing the black, calling him master. It's a bold thing for a story to do to its main character, and it's a bit of a gut punch to watch. What pulls him back is Leia. She comes for him, and she's strong in the Force too, remember? She's Vader's daughter every bit as much as Luke is his son, and between the two of them, they manage to turn on Palpatine at last. There's a whole final campaign called Operation Shadowhand, where the Emperor makes his big push, and the New Republic is scrambling and outgunned all over again, reduced almost to running and hiding like the old Rebel days. But it ends. Around a world called Onderon, and with the destruction of Biss itself, Palpatine is finally, properly, completely gone. No more clones waiting in the wings. The spirit that had haunted the galaxy since before Luke was even born just stops. And this time, it actually sticks. I know I keep saying he came back, and you might reasonably be thinking, well, will he do it again? But no. This is the end of him. Whatever else turns up to trouble the New Republic later, and plenty does, it's never Palpatine again. The old man's story is over. I do want to give you one lovely little tail end to all this, because it's one of my favourite odd corners of the era. After the Emperor's final death, the Empire, as ever, immediately falls to squabbling over who's in charge. And there's this whole saga involving his personal bodyguards, the Royal Guard, those blokes in the red robes and helmets you'll have seen standing very still either side of the throne. Turns out some of them had ambitions of their own. One of them, Kana Jax, engineers things so the last clone bodies fail, clearing his own path to power, and he seizes the throne for himself. And then another guardsman, Kia Kanos, who was loyal to the old Emperor in a way that had frankly stopped making sense, goes on a one-man mission of revenge against Jax for the betrayal. It's this small, sharp, personal little story playing out in the wreckage of the big one. Red-armoured killers hunting each other through the ruins of an empire that's already lost. I always think it's a nice reminder that history isn't only made by the famous names. Sometimes it's two bodyguards and a grudge. But zoom back out, and the picture by this point is this. The Empire has now lost its greatest general, and then its emperor. Twice over really, if you count Endor. What's left of it is smaller, meaner, and increasingly just fighting among itself. The New Republic, battered but standing, holds most of the galaxy, and crucially, the era of the Empire being an existential threat, the thing that might actually undo everything, is drawing to a close. It's still dangerous. It's just not anymore the main character of its own story. Which meant that, for the first time, some of the New Republic's people could stop firefighting for a moment and start thinking about the future. And one man in particular had a very specific idea about what that future needed. He'd been carrying it around for years. And now, at last, he had the breathing room to try it. On a jungle moon called Yavin 4, there's an old stone temple. Great grey pyramids rising up out of the trees, mist on the canopy in the mornings, the whole place thick with vines and birdsong, and the odd unsettling sense that something very old is watching you. If that moon rings a bell, by the way, it should. It's the same moon the rebels launched from to blow up the first Death Star, and it's a place with a much, much longer history than that, which is going to matter in a minute. This is where Luke Skywalker decides to rebuild the Jedi, and I do have a lot of time for what Luke's trying to do here, because it's genuinely a bit mad when you lay it out. He is essentially the last Jedi. The Order that once had thousands of members was wiped out. The temples were destroyed, the knowledge scattered or burned, the traditions broken. Luke himself was trained by two very old men in fits and starts, one of whom was a small green swamp-dwelling gentleman, and neither of whom exactly finished the job before dying on him. So Luke is trying to restart a tradition that's basically been extinct for a generation, working mostly from scraps, with no proper teacher of his own to fall back on. He is making it up as he goes, and he knows it, and he does it anyway. That takes a kind of quiet nerve I've always admired. He calls the school the Jedi Praxium, and he starts gathering up Force-sensitive people from across the galaxy, ordinary folk mostly, who never knew what that odd feeling they'd had all their lives actually was. There's Kip Durran, a young man who spent years in the spice mines of Kessel, which is about as rough a start as you can have. There's Streen, an older chap who'd been living as a hermit because he could hear everyone's thoughts, and it was driving him spare. Kiorana T, a warrior woman from a world of witches. Gantoris, a whole first class of them, sitting in an ancient temple, learning to lift rocks with their minds and quiet their fear. Now, that long history of Yavin 4 I mentioned, this is where it comes back to bite everyone. If you watched my Old Republic video, you'll remember a Sith Lord called Exar Kun, fallen Jedi, Dark Lord, absolute menace, thousands of years before any of this. And you might remember that when he was finally beaten, it happened right here, on Yavin 4, and his body was destroyed, but his spirit was not. It got bound to this place. It's been sitting in these temples for 4,000 years, patient as anything, waiting, and a temple full of untrained, powerful, slightly frightened New Force users is, for a bored ancient Sith spirit, an absolute buffet. Kun starts working on them, whispering, appearing to them, offering them the shortcuts and the quick power that the dark side always offers. And he gets his hooks deepest into Kip Durran, the lad from the mines, who's got the most raw anger to work with. Under Kun's influence, Kip goes properly off the rails. He gets hold of a super weapon, and I did promise you there were loads of them. This one's called the Sun Crusher, a small ship that can fire a torpedo into a star and make it go supernova, wiping out the whole system around it. And Kip, full of Kun and full of rage, uses it to destroy an imperial world called Karada. Millions of people, gone in an instant, from a moon that's meant to be a school for peacekeepers. That's a heavy thing for the story to put on a sympathetic young character, and I think it's meant to sit uneasily. Kip isn't a villain exactly. He's a good kid who got hollowed out and used by something far older and colder than he could understand. How they get out of it is rather lovely, actually. It isn't Luke single-handedly saving the day, because at one point Kun even manages to strike Luke down and leave him drifting between life and death, which is not ideal for the headmaster. It's the students, the whole first class of them, banding together, standing in a circle, combining their strength to face down the spirit as one. There's real power in that image, I think. The idea that a thing which had beaten a great Sith Lord and lain in wait for 4 millennia was finally undone, not by one hero, but by a group of frightened beginners deciding to trust each other. Exar Kun's spirit is torn apart, this time for good, and the temples of Yavin 4 are finally, genuinely quiet. Kip, for what it's worth, comes back from it. He's racked with guilt, understandably, over Carida, and he spends a long time trying to make up for what he did while under Kun's influence. He becomes an interesting, complicated figure later on. A bit of a loose cannon, a bit too willing to do the hard thing. But he's on the right side of it, which given where he started is no small thing. There's a fun little truth buried in all of this, and it's one that made me smile the first time it clicked. Running that school was genuinely difficult for Luke, in a way that had nothing to do with Sith ghosts. His students were, in raw ability, sometimes more powerful than he was. He was a fairly new Jedi himself, teaching people who could occasionally do things he couldn't. It's a bit like being handed a classroom where half the pupils might, on a good day, be stronger than the teacher, and also any one of them going wrong could level a solar system. That's the job Luke signed up for, and he mostly kept his cool through it, which, honestly, no notes. Bless him. So by the end of all this, the Jedi are back. Small, shaky, learning as they go, but real. There's a school, there are students, there's a future for the Order for the first time in decades. It's one of the warmer developments of the whole era. This quiet rebuilding of something that was thought to be lost forever. The New Republic now had its Jedi again, and it was about to find out that the galaxy still had a few old Imperial nightmares tucked away in places nobody had thought to look. One of them had been hiding inside a cluster of black holes. There's a corner of the galaxy near the Kessel system called the Maw, and the geography of it alone is worth a minute of your time. And the Maw is a cluster of black holes, all sitting close together, their gravity tangled up into a lethal maze. By every sensible measure, nothing should be able to live in there. You'd think a knot of black holes would be the last place you'd build anything, which is, of course, exactly why the Empire built something there. Tucked inside the Maw, threading through the one safe path between all that hungry gravity, was a secret research station. The Maw installation. This was where the Empire cooked up its worst ideas away from prying eyes. It's where a lot of the superweapon designs came from in the first place. And it turns out that when the Empire fell apart, someone was still in there, quietly keeping the lights on, waiting for orders that were never going to come. Her name was Admiral Natasi Dala, and Dala had been sitting in the Maw with a small fleet and a head full of Imperial doctrine for years, completely cut off, having missed Endor, missed Thrawn, missed the reborn Emperor, missed the lot, when she finally comes out and discovers that the Empire she served has basically lost the entire galaxy while she wasn't looking. She does not take it well. Not well at all. Now, I'll be straight with you, Dala's military campaign against the New Republic is, on paper, not her finest hour. She comes charging out of the Maw full of righteous fury, and rather learns the hard way that being cut off from the galaxy for years is not great for your tactical instincts. But what she has is the leftovers, the dangerous leftovers that were still sitting in that hidden lab. A prototype Death Star, just the super laser and the framework, no outer shell, this sort of skeletal ball of a thing. And the Sun Crusher, that star-killing ship from the Kip Durran business, which had ended up back in Imperial hands. So even a shaky campaign becomes frightening when the person running it has the keys to a couple of doomsday machines. Running parallel to all this, and I do enjoy this one, is a Hoot. Durga the Hoot, a crime lord who decides that what he really wants in life is his very own Death Star. And rather than build the whole enormous sphere, which is a colossal undertaking, he goes for the budget option. He just builds the important bit, the big super laser, mounted in a long floating framework, no planet-sized ball around it. He calls it the Dark Saber. And it is, frankly, a bit of a shambles. He hires a race of engineers to build it. They cut corners because he's underpaying them, and generally being a horrible boss. And the whole thing ends up structurally unsound. A giant gun held together by hope and Hutt's stubbornness. It does not end well for Durga. There's something quite satisfying about a villain whose scheme falls apart mostly because he was too cheap and too unpleasant to do it properly. The galaxy's deadliest weapon, brought low by bad management. I think about that more than I probably should. But the really important thing Darla does, and this is the bit that actually shapes the rest of the era, isn't any of her attacks. It's this. She takes a hard look at what's left of the Empire, all those deep-core warlords still squabbling among themselves, each one convinced he's the rightful heir, all of them refusing to cooperate, and she decides she's had enough of it. So she gathers the lot of them together in one room, and she kills them. All of them. The whole squabbling pack of would-be emperors, dealt with in a single, ruthless afternoon. It's a cold thing to do, obviously, but you can follow her logic. The infighting was killing the Empire more surely than the New Republic ever could. She looked at a body tearing itself apart and decided the only cure was to cut out everyone who was pulling in a different direction. And having done it, she then handed what was left, this now unified remnant, over to someone far better suited to running it than she was. And who did she hand it to? Pelion. Captain Pelion, Thrawn's old right hand, the steady, decent officer I told you to keep an eye on. He's not a captain anymore. He's risen through the ranks, and he inherits this consolidated imperial force and turns it into something disciplined and coherent, the Imperial Remnant. And I want you to notice the word there. Remnant, not empire anymore. Not a galaxy-spanning power making a comeback. A remnant, a chunk, a surviving piece. That shift in language matters, because it's the moment the Empire stops being the thing that might win and becomes, instead, a stubborn regional power holding onto its corner of the galaxy and trying very hard not to die. So by the end of all this, roughly 12 years after Endor, the map has settled into something you could almost call stable. The New Republic holds the vast majority of the galaxy. The Empire has shrunk down into this hard little remnant out on the edge, under Pelion, who is, whisper it, actually a rather reasonable man. The superweapons have mostly been used up or blown up. Darla steps back from the front line. And there's this sense, for the first time in a long while, that the great desperate wars might genuinely be winding down. Which is a strange feeling for everyone involved, because most of these people have never known peace. Han and Leia have been fighting since they were young. Luke has never once lived in a galaxy that wasn't at war. Even the twins, little Jaqen and Jaina, were born into it. War was the water they all swam in. And now the water was, slowly, starting to still. That doesn't mean nothing happened next, of course. Plenty happened. But for a good stretch here, what happened wasn't world-ending. It was smaller and quieter and more personal. Weddings and heartbreaks and children growing up. The ordinary business of living, which these people had somehow never had time for. And I'd like to spend a little while there, if that's all right, in the quiet bit, before the galaxy remembers how to frighten everyone again. I love this stretch, and I'll tell you why. Not much blows up in it, and after everything we've just been through, all those super weapons and reborn emperors and star-killing torpedoes, there's something deeply pleasant about a few years, where the biggest problems are more or less human ones. Let's start with Luke, because Luke has a bit of a sad time of it here, romantically. He meets a woman called Callista, and their story is one of the stranger love stories in the whole saga. See, Callista was a Jedi long ago, but when she died, her consciousness, her mind, herself, somehow ended up preserved inside the computer of an old ship. So for years she existed as a sort of ghost in the machine, aware, thinking, but with no body. And when Luke finally meets her, she manages to transfer herself into the body of another woman, one of his students, so that they can actually be together. But here's the catch, and it's a heartbreaker. In making that leap, she loses her connection to the Force entirely. The one thing that had defined her whole existence, gone. And Luke, being who he is, doesn't care about that at all. He just loves her. But she can't live with it. She can't bear being cut off from the Force, being near it in Luke, and never able to touch it herself. And so, in the end, she leaves him, to go and try to find her way back to it on her own. And that's it. She just goes. It's a quiet, adult sort of sadness, the kind where nobody's the villain and it still doesn't work out. Luke spends a fair while carrying that around. I think it says something about Luke, actually, that his great loneliness in this period isn't only about romance. He's the last link to the old Jedi. He's rebuilding an entire tradition, largely on his own. Everyone looks to him as this legendary figure, the man who redeemed Darth Vader, and underneath it, he's just a bloke who lost his teachers young and never quite got to be anyone's student. There's a solitude to being the person everyone else depends on. He feels it. Meanwhile, the New Republic itself is settling into a rather familiar shape. And by familiar, I mean it's starting to look an awful lot like the Old Republic did, right before that one rotted from the inside. The government's getting big, comfortable, bureaucratic. Worlds are joining up in huge numbers now that the war's cooling off. Hundreds of thousands of them, all wanting representation, all with their own interests and grievances and things they'd like a committee to look into. And the Senate, freed from the pressure of imminent destruction, goes right back to what Senates apparently love doing more than anything, which is arguing at great length about process. And look, I don't want to be too hard on them. This is what peace looks like, honestly. It's meetings, it's paperwork, it's 1,000 small competing interests being slowly, tediously balanced against each other. It's not exciting, and it's not supposed to be. But you can already feel in this period the first hints of the trouble that's coming. A government that had been forged in a fight for survival was now having to learn how to just run things day to day, forever. And it turns out that's a completely different muscle, and it's one they hadn't really built. One thing that's always fascinated me about a galaxy this size, and I go down this rabbit hole every time, is the sheer boring logistics of it. Think about it. You've got hundreds of thousands of member worlds. How does anything get anywhere? How does a message from one edge of the galaxy reach the other, when even at light speed the distances are so vast? How do you collect taxes from a planet that's weeks of travel away? How do you decide who counts as a citizen, when a citizen might be a human, or a Wookiee, or a sentient crystal, or a gas cloud with opinions? The New Republic had to actually answer these questions in dull practical detail, and I find that strangely soothing to think about. Somewhere out there, in that galaxy far away, there were clerks, there were forms. Someone somewhere was in charge of the shipping lanes and having a rough day about it. It grounds the whole thing somehow, makes it feel real. And then there's the family at the centre of it all. Han and Leia's kids, the twins Jason and Jaina, growing up now, and their little brother Anakin, born a couple of years after them, named after the grandfather they'd never know the full truth about for a good while yet. And I do find it lovely, this idea of the most famous smuggler in the galaxy trying to be a dad. Han Solo doing the school run. Han Solo worrying about whether his kids are getting enough sleep. The Millennium Falcon, that battered old ship that made the Kessel Run, being used essentially as the family car. There's a real tenderness to it. These people who spent their whole lives running and fighting, now fretting over ordinary domestic things because they finally, briefly, get to. The kids are force sensitive, of course, all three of them, being the grandchildren of Anakin Skywalker. So there's Jedi training in their future, and the shadow of everything their family's been through hanging over them. But for now, they get to be children, which, given the century their bloodline has had, is not nothing. So that's the quiet years, heartbreak and paperwork and family dinners. A government slowly turning into a bureaucracy, a group of war heroes slowly turning into middle-aged parents, and a galaxy learning, tentatively, that it was allowed to relax. It wouldn't last, naturally. These things never do, but while it did, it was rather nice. And when the trouble came back, it didn't come from the Empire this time. It came from a corner of the galaxy nobody had been paying attention to at all, from a species that had been quietly nursing a very old grudge. There's a species called the Yvetha, and their story is one of the ones I find genuinely tragic, because of where it starts. They come from a cluster of stars called the Cornacht Cluster, a tight little knot of suns out in the depths of the galaxy. And when the Empire expanded into their region, back in the day, it did what the Empire tended to do. It enslaved them. The Yvetha were clever, quick learners, brilliant with their hands, so the Empire put them to work in shipyards, building and repairing Imperial warships. Slave labour, essentially, tending to the machines of the people who'd conquered them. And then, about 8 months after Endor, when the Empire ordered its garrison to pull out of the Yvethan homeworld, the Yvetha rose up. They'd been watching, they'd been learning, and in one sharp, bloody uprising, they seized the shipyards, took the warships sitting in dock, and killed every Imperial in the place, which honestly, given what had been done to them, it's hard not to feel a certain grim satisfaction on their behalf. The trouble is what they did next, because the Yvetha didn't take their freedom and build something kind with it. They took it and became, in turn, exactly the thing that had oppressed them. Worse, arguably. They looked at their little cluster of stars and they decided that every other species living in it was vermin. Not enemies, not rivals. Vermin, to be cleared out. And they started quietly, methodically, doing exactly that. Wiping out their non-Yvethan neighbours, world by world, a genocide happening in a dark corner of the galaxy that nobody in the wider Republic was paying the slightest attention to. They kept it hidden for years while they built up their strength. This fleet of captured and modified Imperial ships that came to be called the Black Fleet. And their leader was a chap called Neil Spar, and I'll give him this. He was a properly gifted manipulator. Genuinely one of the most effective villains of the whole era, and he barely fires a shot himself. He does it all with words. Because when the Yvetha finally come out of hiding, around 16 years after Endor, Neil Spar doesn't start by attacking. He starts by talking. He comes to Coruscant, all smiles and diplomacy, supposedly to open peaceful relations. And he sits down across from the Chief of State, who by this point is Leia. Leia's risen right to the top of the New Republic now, running the whole thing. And Neil Spar takes one look at the political situation and starts pulling it apart from the inside. Here's what he does, and it's nasty. He gets Leia to send an unarmed scout ship to have a quiet look at Yevothan space. Perfectly reasonable, given the rumours. And then he destroys the scout ship and goes public. Loudly, painting Leia and the New Republic as warmongering aggressors trespassing on a peaceful people. And the New Republic, which by this point is fat and comfortable and desperate to stay at peace, half believes him. Nobody wants another war. Nobody wants to send their sons off to fight over some far-flung cluster they've never heard of. So when Leia tries to raise the alarm about what the Yvetha are actually doing, the genocide, the danger, she finds she can't get anyone to act. And then Spar plays his cruelest card. He digs up the fact of Leia's parentage, because by now it's known more or less that the beloved Princess Leia is the daughter of Darth Vader, and Spar weaponizes that beautifully. He whispers it around the Senate. Look at her, pushing for war, extending her own powers, sending out fleets. Is that not exactly what her father would have done? The blood of a tyrant coming out at last. It's grotesque, and it's effective, and it leaves Leia politically hobbled at the exact moment the galaxy most needs her to act. There's a real cruelty in it, using the worst fact of someone's life against them like that. Things get personal too, in a way that ties back to something we talked about earlier. Han Solo, given command of a task force, ends up captured by the Yvetha, beaten, humiliated, paraded about as a hostage to be used against Leia. And Leia, agonizingly, can't just abandon her post to save her husband, because that's precisely what Spar wants, for her to fall apart. But do you remember way back in the Black Fleet business? No, sorry, back during Thrawn's time, Chewbacca going off to do the impossible for the people he loves? Same thing happens here. Chewbacca had been back on Kashyyyk, home with his family, when word reaches him that Han's been taken. And he doesn't hesitate. He gathers up a band of Wookiees, and off they go, into an Imperial Star Destroyer held by hostile aliens to get their friend back. Which is exactly the sort of thing Chewbacca does, and I want you to hold on to that image of him, loyal to the bone, dropping everything for family, because it's going to matter enormously a little later on. For now, just know that the Wookiees pull it off. They get Han out, and in the end, Nil Spar overplays his hand. His cruelty toward his hostages, the sheer nastiness of him, ends up doing what Leia's warnings couldn't. It unites the New Republic behind her. They finally see the Yvetha for what they are, and they act, and the Black Fleet is broken. Spar himself comes to a fittingly unglamorous end. The threat passes. There's a whole other thread running alongside all this, and it's a gentle one, so it fits the mood nicely. While the political storm is raging, Luke has stepped away from it all. He's left the Jedi Academy in the hands of his students and gone off on a personal quest, because a woman called Akana has come to him claiming to know about his mother. Luke never knew his mother, remember, barely knew anything about her, and Akana tells him she was one of a secretive, pacifist group of Force users called the Falanasi, who use the Force only for gentle illusions, never for violence. So Luke goes wandering the galaxy with Akana, chasing this thread, hoping to finally learn where he came from. And slowly, sadly, he starts to realize the story doesn't hold together. Akana, it turns out, has been using him, spinning him a tale to get his help finding her own scattered people. The mother he was hoping to find at the end of the road isn't there. It's a quiet disappointment, the kind that doesn't come with any drama, just the dull ache of a hope that turns out to be hollow. But he does find the Falanasi, this genuinely lovely, peaceful sect, and he learns something from them about a different way of being in the Force. So the journey isn't wasted. It's just not the journey he thought he was on. So that's the Black Fleet crisis, a freed people who became monsters, a silver-tongued villain who nearly toppled the Republic with nothing but words, and a quiet, sad search for a mother who was never at the end of it. Leia survives it politically, but only just. Her standing's been badly shaken, and the galaxy, having barely caught its breath, was about to shake it a good deal harder. The Senate Hall on Coruscant is gone. That's where I want to start this one, because it's such a stark image. This grand chamber, the heart of galactic democracy, the place where the whole New Republic experiment happened, reduced to rubble by a bomb. And the thing that gets me about it is that it wasn't the Empire that did it. It wasn't some grand external enemy. It was one bitter man with a grudge and a talent for the dark side. His name was Kula, and he'd been, of all things, one of Luke's own students once, a failed one. He'd left the academy, turned dark, and set himself up on a world called Almania with a plan to bring down the New Republic through terror. Bombs mostly, hidden in droids, cruelly enough, so that the very machines people trusted became the things that killed them. And the attack on the Senate Hall was the centerpiece of it. I won't dwell too long on Kula, because in the grand scheme he's a smaller player, but I think it's worth pausing on what he represents. The New Republic had spent all these years bracing for threats from outside. from empires and warlords and alien fleets. And here was proof that some of the most dangerous cracks were on the inside, in its own disillusioned children. That's a harder thing to defend against. But the bigger internal wobble of this period, the one that really shook things, came from a place that should have been solidly loyal. Corellia. Now, Corellia is an interesting one, because it's not some frontier world, it's a core world. Old, proud, wealthy, it's Han Solo's homeworld, as it happens. And the wider Corellian system is this cluster of 5 inhabited worlds, all bunched together, Corellia itself, plus Solonia, Drawl, and the twin planets, Tolus and Tralus. Long history, strong identity, and a definite streak of we'll do things our own way, thank you very much. And buried in that system was one of the strangest objects in the entire galaxy, Centerpoint Station. An absolutely colossal, ancient space station, unbelievably old, older than the Republic, older than almost anything, floating between the twin worlds. Nobody really knew who'd built it or what it was originally for. And it turned out, when someone finally worked out how to switch it on, that center point was a super weapon, a truly monstrous one. It could reach across space and make a star go supernova from light years away. So, another star killer. Yes, we're well into double figures on the super weapons by now, but this one was on a scale that made the others look like toys, and it had been sitting there quietly the whole time, waiting for someone clever and desperate enough to figure it out. The people who figured it out were a shadowy group called the Sarkorian Triad, who wanted to break the Corellian system away from the New Republic and carve out their own little empire. And they stirred up a whole mess of insurrections across the 5 worlds to do it. But the fellow who ended up as the public face of the chaos was a man called Thraken Sal Solo, and that name might jump out at you. Sal Solo. Yes, he's Han's cousin, and he's everything Han isn't. Where Han's a rogue with a good heart under all the swagger, Thraken is a genuinely nasty piece of work, a human supremacist thug who declares himself dictator of the Corellian system and starts making demands. He uses Centerpoint's power to jam all communications across the system, throws up an enormous field that stops any ships jumping in to help, and threatens to start blowing up New Republic worlds one by one unless everyone does as he says. And here's what makes the Corellian crisis land for me. It gets personal for the Solos in a way that's almost uncomfortable. Han, back on his own homeworld, gets captured by his cousin's thugs. Leia, the chief of state, ends up trapped in the system when the field goes up, cut off, unable to call for help. And their children, Jason, Jaina, and little Anakin, are right in the thick of it, having to fend for themselves. And it's the children who crack it in the end. Because it turns out the Solo kids have this unusual, instinctive connection to the ancient Corellian technology, to Centerpoint and the systems tied to it, young Anakin especially. He's just a boy at this point, but he has this uncanny link to the great old machine, an almost intuitive understanding of how it works. And when it comes down to the wire, it's Anakin who manages to reach into that vast ancient thing and shut it down. A child quieting a weapon that could kill stars. Nobody quite understood how he did it. Some clever people had theories, and I'll just gently flag, that connection of Anakin's to Centerpoint isn't going to stay a footnote. It comes back, but that's a worry for another night. The crisis passes, the fleet arrives once the field drops, the Triad surrenders, Thraken gets slung into a very unpleasant prison, and the Corellian system, grumbling, stays part of the New Republic, order restored. But the cost of it, politically, was Leia. And this is the sad through line of this whole middle stretch of the era. She'd now presided over the Yevothan business, the bombing of the Senate Hall, and the Corellian mess, one crisis after another, and every time her critics found a way to make it her fault. Never mind that she'd fought like anything through all of them. The Senate had grown restless and mean, full of newer members with less principle than the founders, and there'd been votes of no confidence, and the constant low drumbeat of that same old poison. Remember whose daughter she is. And eventually, worn down by all of it, Leia does something I find genuinely moving. She doesn't cling on. She doesn't fight to keep her grip on power the way a lesser person would. She steps back. She requests an indefinite leave of absence from the presidency, and a caretaker called Ponk Gavrisom takes over. And under him, the government shifts even further towards spreading power out, weakening the centre, everyone still so frightened of concentrating authority in any one place. There's a bitter sweetness to watching Leia walk away from it. She'd given so much, and the thanks she got was to be blamed for surviving crises that would have broken most people. But there's also something clean about it. She knew when to let go. Not everyone in this story does. So the New Republic entered its later years a bit battered, a bit exhausted, a bit worn thin by its own endless internal squabbling. The great external threats had mostly faded. What remained was this large, sprawling, comfortable, quarrelsome government and one old Cold War that had been simmering for 2 decades and simply never been formally put to bed. And believe it or not, putting that old war to bed is where the next bit goes. Because after 20-odd years, someone was finally quietly going to decide it was time to stop fighting. The last great crisis of the Galactic Civil War began in about the least dramatic way you could imagine. Not with a fleet or a superweapon or a villain twirling anything. It started with a document, an old file that everyone had assumed was lost, and that single old file very nearly plunged the whole New Republic into civil war with itself. Let me back up and explain, because it's a properly clever bit of history, this one. A long time ago, right around the birth of the Empire, there was a beautiful, gentle, peaceful world called Kamas. The Kamasi were famously kind people, pacifists, deeply respected across the galaxy, and the Empire destroyed their world, burned it, left it a poisoned ruin. It was one of the great atrocities of the age, right up there with what happened to Alderaan, and the whole galaxy grieved for Kamas. But here's the thing that had always nagged at people. Kamas had planetary shields, good ones. The Empire shouldn't have been able to burn the world so completely with those shields up. And the answer, the terrible answer, was that someone had sabotaged the shields from the inside first. Someone had betrayed Kamas to the Empire, and for years nobody knew who. Then, all this time later, the Kamas document surfaces, and it reveals the truth. The saboteurs were Bothans, a handful of them, members of the same species as, oh, would you look at that, Borsk Failure, who by this point is one of the most powerful politicians in the New Republic. And the galaxy loses its mind, because suddenly there's this question with no good answer. How do you hold a whole species accountable for something a few of its members did decades ago? Do you? Should the Bothans, as a people, pay for the sins of a few? The anti-Bothan feeling boils over. Old grudges come roaring back. Worlds start squaring up against each other. And the New Republic, this fragile confederation that only ever half agreed on anything, teeters right on the edge of tearing itself apart in a proper civil war. Over history, over guilt, over a document. And the tangled part, the part I really enjoy, is that the Empire, the Imperial remnant out on the edge, sees this chaos and tries to take advantage. There's a moth called Disra, a scheming sort, who cooks up an audacious plan to exploit the mess. And the centerpiece of his plan is a con. A man called Flim, a con artist who happens to look the part, gets dressed up and coached to impersonate a figure the whole galaxy fears. Grand Admiral Thrawn. Yes, that Thrawn. Dead these 10 years, killed at Bilbringi, but Disra reasons that if worlds start believing the Great Blue Tactician has returned, they'll flock back to the Empire out of sheer terror. And it half works. A few worlds, seeing the New Republic apparently disintegrating over the Bothan business, decide the Empire's suddenly looking like the safer bet and start drifting back. A fake Thrawn, a real crisis, an Empire held together with a costume and a rumour. It's marvellous in a grubby sort of way. But the person who actually matters most in all this isn't the con man. It's Pellaeon. Our steady, decent Pellaeon, who by now is the supreme commander of the entire Imperial fleet. And Pellaeon does something that, for an Imperial officer, takes real courage. He looks at the situation honestly. After more than 20 years of fighting, he sits down and admits the truth to himself and then to his fellow Imperials. The war is over. The Empire lost. It lost a long time ago, and every day they keep pretending otherwise just wastes more lives for nothing. And so, rather than a last desperate throw of the dice, Pellaeon chooses to do the sensible, dignified, almost unthinkable thing. He decides to sue for peace, to surrender, on terms, while the Empire still has enough left to negotiate with. I've got such respect for that. It's the opposite of everything the Empire had ever stood for. No fanaticism, no last stand, no glory. Just a tired old soldier deciding that survival and peace were worth more than pride. Thrawn's old right hand, ending the war his old master had fought to win, by choosing to lose it gracefully. And so it happens. The Karmas crisis gets defused once people realise how badly they've been manipulated. The fake Thrawn is exposed, and Pellaeon meets with the New Republic's caretaker leader, Gavrisum, and they sign a treaty. The Pellaeon-Gavrisum Treaty. And that, after all these years, is the actual formal end of the Galactic Civil War. The war that started before Luke ever left his home planet, before the first Death Star, the one we watched begin all those chapters ago over Endor, over, on paper, signed. The Empire, or what's left of it, gets to keep its little corner, 8 sectors out on the edge of the Outer Rim, around its capital at Bastion. And in exchange it stops being at war with the galaxy. It becomes officially a small neighbour, not a threat, just a place on the map with a different flag. There's a lovely wry little coda to the whole Karmas business, by the way, and it's the kind of detail that makes the galaxy feel real, because Bothans, it turns out, live a very long time. So when the New Republic finally identifies the actual individuals who sabotaged those shields all those decades ago, most of them are still alive, old now, but alive, so they could actually be arrested and put on trial and made to answer for it personally. The crime hadn't outlived its criminals after all. Justice delayed by a generation, but not denied. I find that quietly satisfying, that the people who did the thing were still around to face it. So there we are, the Great War of the Age done. And you might think, right, that's it, surely now they get their peace. Surely now, after everything, these people get to rest. And for a little while, they do, genuinely. There's a stretch here that's about as close to a happy ending as the New Republic ever gets. And I want to give it its due, before everything changes, because the folk in this story earned a bit of joy. There was even, at long last, going to be a wedding. After all the heartbreak I've walked poor Luke through tonight, he finally gets it right. And I'm so pleased about it that I want to start this stretch right there, with Luke and Mara. Do you remember Mara Jade, from way back in the Thrawn days? The former Emperor's hand, the woman who spent years carrying around a burned-in compulsion to kill Luke Skywalker, of all people. Well, nothing brings two people together quite like slowly getting over the fact that one of you was once magically ordered to murder the other, apparently, because over all these years the two of them had gone from enemies to reluctant allies to friends to something more. And around the time the old war finally ends, they marry. And it's genuinely one of the warmest moments in the whole saga, because these are two people who each spent their lives profoundly alone, in their different ways. Luke, the last Jedi, the legend everyone leaned on, and nobody quite knew. Mara, the weapon, raised to serve a monster, cut loose when he died with no idea who she was meant to be without him. Two lonely, guarded, formidable people, finding in each other the one person who actually understood the shape of that loneliness. There's a rightness to it. I'm not ashamed to say I find the whole thing quite lovely. And it's more than just a nice moment for two characters, because Mara becomes a Jedi herself, a properly powerful one, and together she and Luke become the anchor of the growing new Jedi Order. The school on Yavin 4 isn't a handful of nervous beginners anymore. It's a real order now, with real knights rebuilding steadily, and the two of them at the heart of it. After a lifetime of Luke carrying the whole weight of the Jedi tradition on his own, he finally has a partner to share it with. That matters. That's a man who gets to stop being lonely. Now, the other thing happening in this stretch is that the kids have grown up. And I do love the young Jedi of this period because they feel like an actual group of teenagers rather than a set of prophecies with legs. There's the Solo twins, Jason and Jaina, all grown now and training at the academy. Jason's the thoughtful one, forever asking whether it's even right to use the Force as a weapon, deeply serious about the philosophy of it all. Jaina's the practical one, brilliant with machines, more like her dad, happiest with a Hydra spanner in her hand. And they've got their friends. There's Lobaka, a young Wookiee, who's Chewbacca's nephew. And yes, before you ask, everyone calls him Loey. There's Tainal Kar, a warrior princess from a matriarchal star cluster, tough as old boots. There's Zek, a proper little gang of them, growing up together, having their adventures, sorting out the smaller messes of the galaxy while their parents handled the big ones. They tidy up a few loose ends during these years, this new generation. There's an anti-human hate group called the Diversity Alliance that they help put down, which is a nasty piece of business. A species deciding that the way to right old wrongs is to wipe out humanity. And there's a bloke called Chethros trying to revive the old Black Sun crime syndicate, that ancient galactic underworld organisation, and the young Jedi see him off too. Nothing galaxy ending, just the ordinary work of keeping a large, complicated piece ticking over. The sort of thing a healthy republic ought to be able to handle without too much drama. Meanwhile, the old guard is quietly stepping down. Leia, remember, had already walked away from the presidency during all that Corellian business. Now she makes it permanent. She resigns properly, for good, and in the election that follows, the top job goes to, of all people, Borsk Failure. Yes, the scheming Bothan who'd been a thorn in everyone's side since the very founding, who went after Akbar during the Thrawn crisis, whose own species had been at the centre of the Karmas mess. That Borsk Failure, now Chief of State of the entire New Republic, which tells you something a bit worrying about the state of the government by this point. The principled founders were bowing out, and the people replacing them were, let's say, a good deal more interested in their own advancement. The infighting of the old Republic, the very thing these people had sworn never to repeat, was creeping back in. And then there's Mon Mothma, the first Chief of State, the woman who read out the Declaration, who held the whole rebellion together through its darkest years, who was arguably the single most important figure in the founding of everything we've been talking about tonight. She dies during these years, quietly, of old age and long illness, an elder stateswoman at the end of a life that had bent the whole course of galactic history. And with her goes the last of that founding generation's moral centre. It's the end of an era in the truest sense. The people who built the New Republic, out of hope and desperation, were passing the galaxy on to those who'd only ever known it as an established thing. Something is always lost in that handover. A bit of the original fire goes out. But I don't want to end this section on a sad note, because on the whole, this is a good time. Maybe the best time the New Republic ever had. The Great War is over and signed off. The Empire's a quiet neighbour now. The Jedi are back and thriving under Luke and Mara. The next generation is coming up strong. Leia and Han get to be, for a bit, just parents and private citizens. There's a wedding. There are children training in the old temple. There's peace of a kind that most of these people had frankly never expected to live to see. If you were going to freeze the New Republic at one moment and say, there, that's it at its best, it'd be right about here. A tired galaxy finally resting, old enemies at peace, a new generation with its whole future ahead of it. Which is, of course, exactly why what happens next hits the way it does. Because right at this moment, when everyone had finally let their guard down, when the galaxy was as safe and settled as it had ever been, something was coming toward it from the black between galaxies. Something that didn't care about the Empire, or the Republic, or the Jedi, or any of the old quarrels that had defined everything up to now. Something that was going to make all of it look small. Here's a fun fact to ease us into this, though fun might be the wrong word given where it goes. Everything we've talked about tonight, the Empire, the Republic, the Jedi, the Sith, all of it happened inside one galaxy. Our galaxy, the one the story lives in. And it's easy to forget that a galaxy is just one island of light in an enormous dark ocean, and that there are other islands out there, other galaxies, and that in principle, something could cross the water between them. Something did. They were called the Yuuzhan Vong, and they were like nothing the galaxy had ever faced, because they came from outside it entirely. The Yuuzhan Vong were refugees in a sense, though terrible ones. Their own galaxy had died long ago, and they'd spent untold centuries crossing the void between galaxies in enormous living world ships, nursing their faith and their grievances the whole way. And their whole civilization was built on a principle that made them fundamentally alien to everything in this galaxy. They despised machines, loathed technology, considered it blasphemy, an abomination. Everything they used, they grew. Their ships were living creatures. Their weapons were living creatures. Their armor, their tools, their communications, all of it biological, coaxed and bred and shaped from living tissue. A Yuuzhan Vong warrior carried a snake that could go rigid into a blade. Their fighters were coral-skinned beasts that flew through space and spat molten rock. It's a genuinely unsettling idea, an entire war machine made of meat and faith rather than metal and circuitry. And there were two things about them that terrified the galaxy above all. The first was their cruelty, which was religious. They worshipped pain, theirs and everyone else's. They mutilated themselves as acts of devotion, and they inflicted suffering on their enemies as a form of prayer. There was no reasoning with that, no diplomacy, no clever manipulation like Neil Spar's. Just an absolute, faith-driven certainty that the galaxy was theirs by divine right, and everyone in it was an infidel to be conquered or sacrificed. The second thing, and this is the one that shook the Jedi to their core, was that the Yuuzhan Vong could not be touched by the Force. At all. They existed as blank spots. A Jedi reaching out with their senses would feel every living thing in a room except a Yuuzhan Vong, who registered as simply nothing, an absence, a hole in the world. For an order that had rebuilt itself around the Force as the thing that connected all life, an enemy that the Force couldn't even perceive, was almost philosophically horrifying. How do you fight what you cannot feel? Now, the invasion didn't announce itself. That wasn't their way. It began with quiet infiltration, agents slipping into the galaxy ahead of the main force to sow confusion. The chief of these was a fellow called Nomanor, a schemer who'd actually been stirring up trouble in the galaxy for years, testing its defences, learning its weaknesses. He arranged provocations. He even, in a genuinely cruel stroke, infected a number of people with a Yuuzhan Vong disease, one of whom was Mara. So while the galaxy's attention was scattered and its heroes were distracted by illness and small brushfires, the first wave of the invasion made planetfall out in the quiet backwaters of the Outer Rim, at a point the invaders had marked as their entry into this galaxy, and the New Republic barely noticed. That's the tragedy of the opening of this war. This comfortable, sprawling, quarrelsome government, run now by Borsk Failia, was so wrapped up in its own politics and its own complacency that when the reports first trickled in of strange attacks on distant worlds, nobody in charge took it seriously. They'd known peace too long. They couldn't imagine a threat big enough to matter anymore. the moment it became real, the moment the galaxy learned that something genuinely awful had arrived, happened on a world called Cernpiddle. And I have to tell you about it, because it's one of the most affecting things in this entire era, and I want to give it the quiet it deserves. Han Solo had gone to Cernpiddle on a simple cargo run, a favour really, and he'd brought 2 people with him. His youngest son, Anakin, growing into a fine young Jedi now, and Chewbacca, his oldest friend in all the galaxy. The Wookiee who'd been at his side since before any of this began, through every scrape and smuggling run and war. The one who, as we saw, would drop everything and charge into anything for the people he loved. When they arrived, something was terribly wrong. The planet's moon was hanging too close in the sky and getting closer. The Yuuzhan Vong had planted one of their living gravity creatures on the surface, and it was dragging the moon down out of the heavens, slowly, inexorably, to crush the world. It was a massacre disguised as an act of nature. Han and Chewie and Anakin did what those people always did. They got as many souls as they could onto the Falcon. They ran rescue after rescue, while the sky itself came down around them, the ground shaking, the light going strange, everyone scrambling to escape. And in the chaos of the last run, young Anakin was knocked from the ship. And Chewbacca, of course, without a second's hesitation, went back for him, pulled him to safety, got the boy aboard, but the Wookiee didn't make it back himself. The Falcon had to lift, or everyone aboard would die, and Han, screaming for his friend, had no choice but to fly. And the last anyone saw of Chewbacca, he was standing on the surface of Cernpiddle, roaring defiance up at the moon as it fell, refusing to the very end to go quietly. And then the moon came down, and the world broke apart, and he was gone. I'll be honest, I still find that one hard. Chewbacca had been there from the very beginning. He was the constant, the one you never worried about, the one who always came home. And to have him die like that, saving a friend's child, going back one last time the way he always did, it landed like nothing had before. When it first happened, it genuinely shocked people, because up to that point, the sense had been that the core group was somehow safe, that the story wouldn't really hurt them. Chewbacca's death was the moment everyone understood that this time the gloves were off, that nobody was safe anymore. The Falcon carried the survivors away, Han carried a grief he'd never fully put down, and the galaxy at last understood that it was at war. They struck back, of course. There was a counterattack at a frozen world called Helska, where the first scouting wave of the invaders was destroyed. A victory of sorts, but it came with the quiet, dreadful knowledge that this had only been the advance party. The scouts, the tip of something vastly larger, still out there in the dark, still coming. The galaxy had won its first skirmish, and it had lost one of its best and oldest and gentlest souls to do it. We'll sit with the war a while longer, but gently, it gets heavy from here, and I'll not rush you through it. The world of Ithor was a place of forests, great floating cities drifting above unspoiled jungle, tended by a gentle herd species who loved growing things more than anything in the galaxy. And there's a detail about Ithor I find quietly perfect. Its trees gave off a pollen that was toxic to the Yuuzhan Vong's living armour. Of all the worlds in the galaxy, this peaceful garden of a planet turned out to be one of the few things that could actually hurt the invaders just by existing. So they burned it, turned the whole world into a fireball from orbit, rendered it dead and uninhabitable, rather than let that green thing stand. And that really tells you everything about the middle years of this war. It was not a war of conquest so much as a war of erasure. World after world fell, and the pattern kept repeating. Dubrillion, Dantooine, Obroa Sky, the Jedi driven off Yavin 4, and their old temple lost to them. The invaders came, and things stopped being. Whole species wiped out, whole worlds unmade. The numbers of the dead climbed into figures too large to actually feel, the kind of number that stops being people and becomes just a fact you can't hold in your head. And with every world that fell, a tide of refugees washed further inward, toward the core, toward whatever safety was left. Millions upon millions of frightened people with nowhere to go, and a government that had no idea what to do with them. It's one of the grimmer, more realistic threads of this whole war, honestly. Not the battles, but the refugees, the sheer weight of displaced life that a galaxy at war produces, and the way even good people start to see them as a problem rather than a tragedy when there are simply too many. Now here's the part where the New Republic really shows its worst side, and I think it's important because it's the moment the government we've followed all night starts, in a sense, to fail on its own terms. As the war went badly, people looked for someone to blame, and a lot of them landed on the Jedi. The reasoning, if you can call it that, went like this. The Yuuzhan Vong particularly hated the Jedi, hunted them with special fury. So if the galaxy just got rid of the Jedi, handed them over, maybe the invaders would leave everyone else alone. And the Yuuzhan Vong, being clever about cruelty, encouraged exactly this. Their war master, a fearsome figure called Tsavong La, publicly offered the galaxy a deal. Give us the Jedi, all of them, and we'll show you mercy. And to the lasting shame of the New Republic, a great many of its people were tempted. Its own protectors, the Order Luke had spent his life rebuilding, and there were senators and citizens seriously willing to feed them to the enemy to save their own skins. The Jedi ended up hunted by the very government they were dying to defend, forced into hiding, hounded by an organization of collaborators. It's a bleak look at how fear rots people, how quickly a frightened society will turn on its best in the hope the monster eats them instead. The Jedi kept fighting anyway, and that brings me to the mission to Myrka, which is one of the hardest chapters in the whole thing. And I'll tell it plainly. The Yuuzhan Vong had bred a creature specifically to hunt Jedi, a thing called a voxin which could track a Force user and kill them, and they were cloning these things by the score from a single queen. So a group of young Jedi, the generation we watched grow up, resolved to strike at the source, to go deep into an enemy world ship and destroy the Voxin Queen herself and stop the things being made. It was led by Anakin Solo, Han and Leia's youngest, the boy who'd shut down Centerpoint, grown now into perhaps the most gifted of them all. They did it. They reached the Queen and they destroyed her. But the cost was terrible. Nearly half the strike team didn't come home. And Anakin himself was killed, holding off the enemy so the others could complete the mission, giving his life so the rest could get through. He died the way the very best of them tended to, spending himself completely for the people beside him. I'll let that sit for a moment, because it deserves it. Han and Leia had lost Chewbacca. Now they lost a son. This family that had been at the heart of every triumph of the age was paying for this war in the cruelest currency there is. And it wasn't even the end of the sorrow from that one mission, because in the fighting, Anakin's older brother Jason, the thoughtful one, the one always asking the deep questions about the Force, was captured. Taken alive by the Yuuzhan Vong, carried off into captivity, his family with no idea whether he was alive or dead. So in a single mission, the Solos lost one boy to death and another to the enemy. It's an enormous amount of grief to load onto people we've watched be so lucky for so long. While the Jedi were bleeding at Myrka, the invaders made their great move. They'd spent years grinding inward, and now they went for the throat. Coruscant, the city world, the capital, the prize the New Republic had chased in its infancy, and finally won, the symbol of the whole thing. And they took it. After a long and dreadful battle, Coruscant fell. Borsk failure, the chief of state, the scheming Bothan who'd caused so much trouble over so many years, well, he found his moment of genuine courage right at the end. He refused to flee. He stayed on the falling capital, and as the enemy closed in on him, he set off a final act of defiance that took a great many of them with him. Say what you like about the man, and there's plenty to say, but he didn't run. There's something to that. People are rarely only one thing. And then the Yuuzhan Vong did to Coruscant what they did to everything. They remade it. They tore out the machine city, the endless towers and levels, and began growing it over with living jungle, turning the great grey world into something organic and strange. They renamed it too, after their own long-lost homeworld. Yuuzhan Tar, the heart of the galaxy, the seat of power, going back to the old Republic, unmade and reshaped into a monument to the invaders' dead gods. The fall of Coruscant was the lowest point. The new Republic had lost its capital, lost its chief of state, lost worlds beyond counting, lost some of its brightest young Jedi, and been driven, battered and grieving, to the edge of collapse. It was, by any honest measure, losing this war. And yet, even here, at the very bottom of it, there were embers. Because losing Coruscant, terrible as it was, forced something the New Republic had been avoiding for its entire existence. It forced these people to, finally, genuinely change. But that's the next part of the story. And it's the last part. So let's take a breath before we get there. Let me start this last stretch with a man holding a hopeless position, because it's one of my favourite quiet bits of the whole war. After Coruscant fell and the New Republic scattered, someone had to hold the line somewhere while everyone regrouped, and the someone was Wedge Antilles. Remember Wedge, the pilot from way back, the working man of the whole saga, the fellow who flew both Death Star runs and never got a statue? Well, decades on, he's a general now, and he's the one given the job of holding a world called Borleas, a stepping stone position the New Republic couldn't afford to lose. And Wedge holds it, against the odds, against a far stronger enemy, with cleverness and grit and that same unglamorous competence he'd shown his entire life. And it's at Borleas, in that desperate holding action, that the whole comeback quietly begins. I love that it's Wedge. Not a Jedi, not a chosen one, not a legend. Just the reliable bloke who kept showing up, quietly turning out to be the hinge the entire war swung on. Part of what made Borleas work was one of the cleverest schemes of the war, and it involved Jaina Solo. Jaina, grieving her dead brother and her captured one, threw herself into the fight, and she and her comrades came up with something audacious. The Yuuzhan Vong were deeply religious, remember, and they had a trickster goddess in their faith called Yunhala. So Jaina, a brilliant pilot with a growing, frankly, frightening reputation among the enemy, leaned into it. She let them believe she might be the goddess herself, an avatar of their own trickster deity walking among them. And it worked. It threw their commanders into confusion and rash decisions. Because how do you fight something your own religion tells you to revere? Using the enemy's faith against them. It's the sort of move Thrawn would have admired, honestly. And there was a deeper rot spreading through the Yuuzhan Vong from the inside too, which I find genuinely fascinating. Because for all their contempt for the galaxy's peoples, some of the Yuuzhan Vong, the lowest and most downtrodden of them, the ones their own society had shamed and cast aside, started to notice something. They saw the Jedi. They saw beings who used a power their own gods had denied them, beings who showed mercy, who valued life, and a heresy began to grow in the lower castes, a quiet, dangerous idea that maybe their leaders were wrong. Maybe the gods had abandoned them. Maybe these Jedi were closer to the truth than the priests who'd been grinding them down. It's a lovely bit of storytelling, that. The invaders' greatest vulnerability turning out to be the people they themselves had mistreated. But the single most important thing that happened in these final years wasn't a battle at all. It was a decision. Because the New Republic, having lost its capital and its leader, had to choose new leadership. And the man who rose to it was called Cal Omas. And Omas looked honestly at the government he'd inherited, and he understood something that everyone had been avoiding since the very founding, all those chapters ago. The New Republic, as built, could not win this war. It was too slow, too decentralized, too tangled in its own committees and its own fear of central authority, the very thing that had made it feel safe, all that spreading out of power we talked about, the deliberate weakness at the centre, was getting people killed. So he changed it. He drafted a new charter, he streamlined the whole thing, pulled the executive power back together enough that the government could actually act in a crisis, and he brought in partners the old New Republic would never have managed to unite. The Imperial Remnant, its old enemy, now an ally against a common horror. The Hapes Consortium, eventually even the Insular Chiss, from out in the unknown regions. And he gave the new government a new name, the Galactic Federation of Free Alliances. The Galactic Alliance everyone ended up calling it. And that right there is the quiet death of the New Republic. Not with a bang, not with a last stand or a great defeat. It simply transformed. The New Republic ended by becoming something better suited to survive, handing its authority to a government that could actually fight. If you've been waiting all night for the dramatic fall of the New Republic, this is it, and it's almost administrative. A new constitution, a new name. The thing we'd followed from that bonfire over Endor didn't so much die as grow up finally, under the worst possible pressure, into the thing it probably always needed to be. And the new government turned the tide. Slowly. The Yuuzhan Vong were dealt a genuine disaster at a place called Abak 9, a trap that shattered a huge part of their strength and killed their war master. Their internal heresy kept eating at them. Jaqen Solo, remember, the captured brother, endured a long and terrible captivity and came out of it changed, transformed into something far more powerful than the uncertain young man who'd been taken and eventually escaped. And in one of the stranger and more beautiful turns of the whole saga, it emerged that the Yuuzhan Vong's own long-lost living homeworld, a sentient planet called Zonama Sekot, still existed out in the unknown regions. And Luke led an expedition to find it, and it chose to come to the galaxy's aid, arriving over Coruscant itself at the climax of the war. The final confrontation came down to Luke facing the Yuuzhan Vong's supreme leader, Shimra, and the true power lurking behind the throne, a twisted little figure called Onami, who turned out to be the real hand behind it all. And with their leadership broken, the living homeworld returned, and the heresy, having hollowed them out from within, the Yuuzhan Vong finally, after years of horror, laid down their arms. Their new warmaster surrendered. The war ended with an agreement called the Sekot Accords, which offered the defeated Yuuzhan Vong a chance to settle peacefully, to be healed of their own self-inflicted cruelty, given a world to live on. It was honestly a controversial peace. A lot of people in the galaxy, having lost so unspeakably much, could not stomach mercy for the invaders, and you can hardly blame them. But it held, and Coruscant, the great city world, was liberated at last, though it would carry the scars and the new-grown jungle of its time as Yuuzhan Tar for a long while yet. By the end of it, the count of the dead was almost beyond comprehension. Hundreds of trillions of lives. Chewbacca, Anakin Solo, Admiral Akbar, the old Mon Calamari from the founding, who died during these years too. One more of that first generation gone. Whole species, whole worlds, simply erased. It was the most costly war the galaxy had ever known, but the galaxy survived. Battered beyond recognition, grieving, forever changed, but alive. And the government that carried it through to the other side wasn't quite the New Republic anymore. It was the thing the New Republic had become in its final act in order to live, which feels like the right place to start bringing all this into land. So there it is, the whole life of the New Republic. From that bonfire over Endor to the quiet moment it signed itself into something new. About 24 years, give or take, which, when you say it out loud, isn't very long at all, shorter than a lot of people's careers. And yet, look at everything that got packed into it. I think what stays with me when I sit back and look at the whole shape of it is how endearingly, relentlessly bad the New Republic was at the one thing it was supposed to be good at: governing itself. These were brave, principled people who could win an impossible war against the Empire, and then get completely tangled up trying to agree on almost anything in peacetime. They were so frightened of becoming the thing they'd beaten that they built a government that could barely act, and it took an enemy from beyond the stars to finally shock them into fixing it. There's something very human in that, something a bit like the way we all are, honestly. Better in a crisis than in the long, quiet stretches, better at fighting for the thing than at living with it once we've got it. And through all of it, the same handful of people, the same family really, a farm boy who became the last Jedi and then wasn't the last after all, a princess who lost her whole world and spent the rest of her life trying to build a better one, a smuggler who never quite stopped being a smuggler even when he was a father and a general and a grieving old man, their children, carrying it all forward, paying for it in ways no child should have to. The Skywalkers and the Solos standing at the centre of every single storm the galaxy could throw for a quarter of a century. It was, in the end, a family story wearing the costume of a galactic one. If you're wondering where the story goes from here, well, that's a whole other tangle. The Galactic Alliance carried on. The younger generation had their own long, difficult road still ahead, and not all of it was kind to them. But those are stories for other nights, and I've got a few of them planned if you fancy them. For now, though, I'll leave you with an image I rather like. Coruscant after the war, the jungle slowly being cleared, the towers slowly being rebuilt, and level by level, night by night, the lights of the great city coming back on. Not the same as it was, it never would be, but lit again, still there, still turning,